sold to a rival pack as payment. The Omega's fate shifted when the Alpha King learned the truth. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to Elena Harper. The night the Stoneclaw Pack decided its future would be decided without mercy, the rain came down steady and cold, tapping against the longhouse roof like a clock, counting what little time remained. Elena Harper stood at the edge of the firelight, hands folded, shoulders straight, listening as elders argued over grain shortages, broken treaties, and debts measured in miles of forest and years of survival. She was an Omega, which meant she spoke only when asked, and tonight no one asked. The pack's numbers were thinning, their stores barely enough to last 6 weeks, and the rival Ravenfell pack had offered terms that sounded like salvation if you didn't look too closely. Elena felt it before she heard it, the subtle shift when eyes stopped circling the fire and landed on her, not with anger or hate, but with calculation. She had grown up learning how to be invisible, how to move quietly through hallways, how to offer help without drawing notice, how to keep her head down when tempers flared. That skill failed her now. A name was spoken, hers, and the room fell silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your heartbeat feel too loud. The elders spoke of payments and guarantees, of how Ravenfell demanded something of value to seal peace, something that would ensure compliance without drawing blood or breaking public law. Elena understood then, with a calm that surprised her, that value did not always mean strength or gold. Sometimes it meant a person who could be spared. The decision was framed as necessity, as duty, as the only path forward that did not end with families scattered and homes lost. No one raised a hand in protest. No one met her eyes long enough to see the question there. She was told she would be transferred at dawn, escorted across the river line, housed according to Ravenfell custom, and treated within the bounds of pack law. The words sounded careful and clean, like a contract drafted to hide its sharp edges. Elena nodded because that was what an Omega did, because dignity was something you carried even when choice was taken away. As the meeting dissolved and the fire burned low, she stepped outside into the wet night, breathing in the scent of pine and rain, measuring the distance to the tree line by the length of her stride, 5 feet at a time, counting steps the way she always had when fear tried to steal her balance. She thought of the small things she had done that day, the bandage changed, the child calmed, the meal stretched to feed one more mouth, and she wondered which of those would be remembered when she was gone. Somewhere beyond the hills, Ravenfell waited, and beyond them all, a higher authority watched the borders with patient eyes. Elena did not know that the truth had already begun to travel faster than the river, carried by whispers and law older than any pact, or that when it reached the Alpha King, the meaning of payment would be rewritten. Morning arrived without ceremony. The rain had thinned to a gray mist, and the Stoneclaw Pack gathered in the yard as if for a routine exchange of supplies, careful to keep their voices level and their faces neutral. Elena Harper stood where she was told to stand, a few feet from the gate, her small travel bag at her side, containing the sum of what she was permitted to take. A change of clothes, a folded scarf, a tin of dried herbs she had prepared herself. No one said goodbye. They said necessary things instead, reminders about compliance, about how this arrangement would protect everyone else, about how she should be grateful the terms were lawful. Elena listened, nodded once, and kept her hands steady. When the Ravenfell escort arrived, they did not look surprised to see her. They checked names, reviewed the sealed document, and measured the distance to the river as if this were a shipment that needed to arrive before noon. The crossing took longer than expected. The water ran high, the bridge slick with fog, and Elena focused on the rhythm of her steps, counting the length in yards the way she always did when nerves threatened to tighten her chest. On the far side, the land felt different, the trees taller, the air sharper, as if every breath carried a rule she did not yet know. Ravenfell's gates opened with practiced efficiency. No ceremony followed, no welcome or insult. She was guided past the main hall and down a narrow path to the Omega quarters, a modest building set back from the center, clean but spare, arranged to keep lives orderly and out of sight. The matron read the terms aloud, voice even, listing expectations and schedules, explaining how work assignments would be posted each morning and how disputes would be handled without escalation. Elena signed where indicated, her name small and precise, aware that her signature meant safety of a sort, bounded by law rather than kindness. The day unfolded in tasks that required no questions. Linen sorted by size, water drawn and set to heat, a shelf repaired with quiet care. She moved through it all without drawing attention, offering help when it was needed and stepping back when it was not. By late afternoon, word spread that the Alpha King would arrive within 48 hours to review the treaty that had brought her here. The announcement traveled like a change in weather, subtle but immediate, causing shoulders to square and voices to lower. Elena learned this secondhand, while mending a tear at the elbow of a jacket left on a bench. She did not pause. She finished the stitch and returned the jacket to its place. That evening, as lights dimmed and the ground settled, she noticed a young runner lingering near the steps, uncertain and pale, holding a message he did not understand. Elena knelt to his level, read it slowly, and explained where it needed to go, sending him off with a nod that steadied his breath. Later, when a draft rattled the windows, she rose to secure them, thinking of the river and the count of her steps across it, thinking of how easily a life could be measured in distances and documents. She did not know who the Alpha King was beyond rumor and seal, but she knew this much already. Laws mattered most when someone was willing to read them closely, and truth, when it arrived, rarely announced itself. As the moon climbed, Elena folded her scarf and placed it at the foot of her bed, a habit she kept when the future felt narrow, and she slept with the calm of someone who had done what she could with the hours she had been given. By the third day, routine settled into place the way frost settles along a fence line, quietly and without asking permission. Elena Harper learned the schedule by listening, not by reading the posted board, and she learned the people the same way, by watching where their eyes went when they thought no one noticed. In Ravenfell, efficiency was valued, but kindness was treated like a private habit rather than a public virtue. Elena adapted. She kept to the edges, completed her assignments, and made herself useful without becoming visible. When the matron assigned her to inventory the apothecary shelves, Elena worked with the patience she had practiced since childhood, aligning jars, refreshing labels, and discarding nothing that could be salvaged. She noticed which remedies were used most often and which had gone untouched for months, and she adjusted the stock accordingly, leaving a small note written in careful script explaining why certain supplies should be kept within reach. The note was unsigned. Later that afternoon, a messenger arrived breathless with news that preparations were accelerating, that banners would be raised by sunset, that the Alpha King's arrival had been confirmed for the following morning rather than the next day. The news did not cause panic, but it did sharpen everything. Footsteps quickened, voices lowered. Authority moved closer to the surface. Elena felt the change in the air the way some people felt pressure before a storm. She was asked to assist with guest linens and assigned a room near the outer hall, a position that required precision but offered little status. She accepted without comment. As she worked, she overheard fragments of conversation, references to legal clauses and witness lists, to how the treaty had been executed and which seals had been applied. She recognized the cadence of formal language, the way truth could be hidden in plain sight by the order of words. That evening, a minor disruption rippled through the courtyard when a courier returned with a document that did not match the registry. It was a small discrepancy, a date written twice, a margin note initialed by someone no longer present. The oversight was dismissed as clerical. Elena saw it for what it was, a loose thread. She did not pull it. She tucked the knowledge away, trusting timing over impulse. As dusk settled, she delivered the prepared linens and paused at the threshold, noticing a guard with a limp favoring his left side. Without drawing attention, she adjusted the room's arrangement so the path from the door to the bed was clear, removing a low table that would have forced an awkward step. The guard noticed later and offered a nod that carried no gratitude, only acknowledgment. That was enough. Night fell early, the sky low and silver. Elena returned to the Omega quarters, washed her hands, and folded her scarf with deliberate care. Sleep came lightly. She woke before dawn to the sound of horns at a distance, measured and restrained. The Alpha King had crossed the final boundary. As the compound stirred, Elena stood and steadied her breath, aware that the truth she carried was not a secret she owned, but a fact waiting for the right authority to recognize it. She had been sold under terms that assumed her silence would make everything lawful. In the quiet before first light, Elena resolved to keep doing what she had done since the beginning, to stand where she was placed, to read what others skimmed, and to trust that when law met attention, outcomes changed. The morning unfolded with a precision that left no room for nerves. Banners rose along the outer hall, their colors catching the pale light, and the courtyard filled with controlled motion as attendants took their places. Elena Harper was assigned to the inner passage near the council chamber, a quiet corridor where messages traveled faster than footsteps. She carried a small ledger and a sealed envelope, instructed to deliver both when summoned and not before. As the Alpha King arrived, the air itself seemed to settle, not from fear but from order, the kind that made people choose their words carefully. Elena did not see him at first. She felt the shift instead, a narrowing of sound, the way conversations softened to a respectful hush. When the council convened, Elena remained just outside the door, close enough to hear the cadence of formal speech without intruding. Names were read, dates confirmed, witnesses acknowledged. The treaty was summarized with emphasis on necessity and mutual benefit. Elena recognized the phrasing, the places where meaning bent toward convenience. When a question arose about compliance procedures, she stepped forward as instructed and delivered the ledger, her hands steady, her eyes lowered. The Alpha King asked for clarification on a marginal note, his voice even, curious without accusation. Elena answered simply, citing the record and the corresponding seal, careful to keep her tone neutral. The room paused. A clerk checked the registry and frowned, then smoothed his expression and moved on. Elena returned to her place, heart quiet, trust placed in process rather than impulse. Later, during a brief recess, a guard approached with a request for assistance in the infirmary. Elena followed, bringing clean cloths and a kettle of warmed water. She worked efficiently, offering comfort through calm presence rather than words, adjusting a pillow, opening a window to let in fresh air. A physician noted her competence and asked where she had trained. Elena answered truthfully that she learned by necessity. The physician nodded, as if that explained more than a certificate ever could. When Elena returned to the corridor, she found a page waiting, eyes wide, holding a document that required immediate delivery. The seal bore the Alpha King's mark. Elena accepted it, feeling the weight of authority not as pressure but as responsibility. Inside the council chamber, discussion resumed with renewed focus. The Alpha King requested to review the circumstances of the exchange that brought Elena to Ravenfell, not as an accusation, but as a matter of completeness. The room adjusted. Explanations were offered. Elena listened as terms were described that matched her memory only in outline, leaving out the parts that made them lawful on paper but hollow in practice. When asked directly whether the transfer complied with the Moon Covenant's protections for Omegas, the response hedged, citing urgency and precedent. The Alpha King did not raise his voice. He asked for the original transfer document and the witness list. Elena stepped forward again when summoned, presenting the sealed envelope she had been carrying since dawn. The clerk broke the seal, scanned the page, and hesitated. A date was wrong. A signature was missing. The room went very still. Elena kept her gaze lowered, aware that truth had a sound when it landed, a soft click like a lock opening. The Alpha King thanked her for her diligence and dismissed her with a nod that carried recognition without display. As Elena withdrew, she understood that her role had never been to argue or accuse, but to place the right facts in the right hands at the right time. Outside, sunlight broke through the cloud cover, and Elena breathed it in, feeling for the first time since the river crossing that the ground beneath her feet might be shifting in a direction she had not dared to imagine. The afternoon brought a measured pause, the kind that followed a door closing softly rather than a verdict delivered aloud. Elena Harper was reassigned to a temporary post near the council antechamber, tasked with coordinating documents requested by the Alpha King and ensuring their sequence matched the registry. It was careful work, the kind that rewarded attention more than speed. and Elena settled into it with the steady focus that had carried her through worse uncertainties. Inside the chamber, voices rose and fell with controlled cadence, questions framed to invite clarity rather than defense. When the Alpha King stepped into the antechamber, Elena looked up for the first time and met his gaze without intending to. King Rowan Blackthorn did not dominate the space by height or volume, but by presence, a quiet certainty that made every detail feel relevant. His eyes were attentive rather than cold, and when they rested on Elena, it was with interest that suggested recognition of competence rather than rank. He asked her name, not as a formality but as a confirmation, and she answered plainly. He thanked her for the records, then asked her to walk him through the timeline as she understood it, not to challenge the council's account, but to ensure no step had been overlooked. Elena spoke carefully, describing dates, seals, and the order in which authority had been applied, keeping her statements factual and brief. As she spoke, Rowan listened without interruption, his expression unchanged, his attention complete. When she finished, he nodded once, as if a piece had settled into place. He asked for a copy of the Moon Covenant provisions governing transfers, and when it was produced, he reviewed the relevant clauses himself, tracing the text with a finger that moved with practiced familiarity. The discrepancy Elena had noted earlier aligned with the clause requiring informed consent and proper witness attestation. Rowan closed the document and thanked the clerk, then turned back to Elena. He asked whether she had been offered alternatives at the time of transfer. Elena answered honestly that she had been offered explanations, not choices. The room quieted. Rowan acknowledged her response and dismissed her to continue her duties, adding that her assistance had been invaluable. As Elena stepped back into the corridor, she felt neither triumph nor fear, only a cautious steadiness, the sense that something precise was unfolding according to rules that favored truth over convenience. Later, she was asked to accompany a senior aide to verify conditions in the Omega quarters. Elena complied, noting the questions asked and the details recorded, from living arrangements to access schedules, each point confirming compliance while revealing the narrow margins allowed. Rowan joined them briefly, observing without comment, then asked Elena a single question that surprised her in its simplicity. He asked how she had managed the transition. Elena considered, then replied that routine helped, and that usefulness made any place survivable. Rowan accepted the answer with a thoughtful pause, then remarked that survivability was not the same as justice. The words were not a promise, but they carried weight. As evening approached, preparations shifted from ceremony to review, and Elena was released from duty with instructions to remain available. She walked the courtyard as the lights softened, measuring the distance between the gate and the hall in familiar strides, feeling the ground firm beneath her feet. When she returned to the quarters, a message awaited her, requesting her presence the following morning for further clarification. Elena folded her scarf and placed it beside the ledger she kept close, understanding now that her fate was no longer moving unseen. Somewhere within the compound, authority was aligning itself with record and law, and for the first time since she crossed the river, Elena allowed herself to believe that the truth, once learned, did not forget. Morning brought a clarity that felt deliberate, as if the compound itself had decided to be honest. Elena Harper was escorted to a smaller council room set apart from the main chamber, where light filtered through high windows and the table held only a few documents arranged with care. King Rowan Blackthorn entered without announcement, accompanied by a legal aide who took a seat near the door. Rowan gestured for Elena to sit, then invited her to speak freely, assuring her that accuracy mattered more than formality. Elena began with the transfer day, recounting the sequence exactly as it happened, the explanations offered, the absence of alternatives, the signatures presented, and the witnesses named. Rowan listened, occasionally asking for dates or clarification, never interrupting the flow. When Elena mentioned the missing attestation and the altered date, Rowan asked for the original record, which the aide produced. He compared it to the copy delivered earlier, noting the discrepancy, without comment. Rowan then asked Elena about her status at Stoneclaw, whether she had been bound by any prior claim or limitation. Elena answered that she had not, that her role had been service without obligation beyond pact duty. Rowan nodded, then requested the Moon Covenant addendum regarding Omega protections during interpact settlements. The aide read the clause aloud, the language precise and unmistakable. The room held a quiet that felt earned. Rowan asked Elena one final question, whether she had been informed of her rights under that clause at any point. Elena replied that she had not. Rowan closed the folder and thanked her, then instructed the aide to convene representatives from both packs for a formal review at midday. As Elena stood to leave, Rowan addressed her again, stating that until the review concluded, she would be under royal protection and reassigned to neutral quarters. The words were measured, not dramatic, but they carried certainty. Elena acknowledged the order and departed, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders in increments rather than all at once. The move to neutral quarters was swift and quiet, a relocation framed as administrative rather than corrective. The room was modest but bright, with a desk, a chair, and a window overlooking the courtyard. Elena placed her ledger on the desk and sat, breathing evenly, allowing herself a moment to absorb the shift. By midday, the compound gathered with restrained anticipation. Representatives arrived, voices polite and careful, posture attentive. Rowan opened the review by outlining the purpose, to reconcile records with law and ensure compliance with the covenant. He invited Stoneclaw's envoy to present their account, then Ravenfell's, asking clarifying questions that exposed gaps without accusation. When discrepancies emerged, Rowan referred to the documents, aligning text with testimony. The pattern became clear. The transfer had been executed under urgency, without the required consent and attestation, rendering the payment invalid under covenant law. Rowan stated the conclusion plainly, neither raised nor softened. He announced that the exchange would be nullified, that corrective measures would be determined according to statute, and that Elena's status would be restored pending formal acknowledgment. No objections followed, only nods and the sound of pens recording decisions. Rowan then addressed Elena directly, acknowledging her composure and diligence, and affirming that her conduct had upheld the very standards the law was designed to protect. The meeting adjourned without spectacle. As the courtyard emptied, Elena stepped into the light, feeling the ground firm beneath her feet. She understood now that truth, when placed carefully and witnessed properly, did not need force to prevail. It needed patience, records, and someone willing to listen all the way through. Under the open sky, Elena folded her scarf and placed it over her arm, ready to move forward, not as a payment reclaimed, but as a person recognized. The announcement traveled faster than footsteps, not as rumor, but as confirmation, and by afternoon the compound carried a different weight. Elena Harper was no longer scheduled by default. Requests came instead, measured and respectful, asking for her presence when clarification was needed. She spent the morning reviewing records with a legal aid, cross-checking dates and seals, ensuring that the correction would be durable rather than symbolic. When King Rowan Blackthorn summoned a joint council to formalize the findings, Elena took a seat along the side, not as an exhibit, but as a witness whose account had already been acknowledged. Representatives from Stoneclaw and Ravenfell arrived with careful faces and prepared statements, their language precise and restrained. Rowan opened the session by summarizing the review, his tone steady, framing the matter as a reconciliation of law and action. He invited questions, then answered them himself by referencing the covenant and the registry, aligning each point with evidence. When Stoneclaw's envoy attempted to reframe urgency as justification, Rowan responded by distinguishing necessity from permission, noting that law existed to govern precisely those moments when urgency tempted shortcuts. The distinction landed without spectacle. Ravenfell's representative accepted the finding and asked about remediation. Rowan outlined the steps: restitution in accordance with statute, oversight to prevent recurrence, and a written acknowledgment to be entered into the public record. He then addressed Elena directly, confirming her restored status and offering options for placement that respected her autonomy. Elena listened, absorbing the shift from object to agent, and asked for time to consider, a request Rowan granted without hesitation. After the council adjourned, Rowan asked Elena to walk with him through the courtyard. The path was wide and sunlit, measured in yards she had already counted. He spoke of governance as stewardship, of how authority failed when it overlooked the quiet details that people like Elena noticed instinctively. He asked what she intended to do next. Elena answered honestly that she wanted work that mattered in a place where her contributions were visible without becoming burdensome. Rowan considered, then offered her a provisional role within the Royal Records Office, a position that valued diligence and impartiality, with the understanding that acceptance would be her choice alone. Elena thanked him and asked a question of her own, whether justice always arrived this way, through paperwork and patience. Rowan smiled faintly and said that justice arrived when someone insisted on completeness, and that patience was simply courage stretched over time. As the afternoon faded, Elena returned to the neutral quarters to gather her things. The room felt temporary now, a threshold rather than a holding space. She folded her scarf, placed her ledger on top, and paused by the window to watch the courtyard settle into evening. A message arrived requesting her presence the following morning to finalize the corrective orders. Elena acknowledged it and sat, letting the day settle. She did not feel triumphant. She felt aligned. The truth had been learned, recorded, and set into motion, not as a favor, but as a correction owed. In the quiet that followed, Elena understood that her fate had not been shifted by rescue or spectacle, but by recognition, the kind that changed how rooms arranged themselves around her. She stood, ready for the next step, aware that when law met attention, outcomes endured. The final session convened at midday beneath an open skylight, chosen deliberately to place the record in full view. Elena Harper entered with the ledger she had kept close since Stoneclaw, its pages now cross-referenced and indexed, and took her place where witnesses sat rather than petitioners. King Rowan Blackthorne opened the proceedings by reading the corrective orders into the record, his voice even and precise, each clause aligned with statute and precedent. He affirmed the nullification of the exchange, outlined restitution owed, and mandated oversight measures to ensure that urgency would not again be used to bypass consent. The scribes wrote steadily. The representatives acknowledged receipt. Without protest, when the formalities concluded, Rowan addressed the assembly and stated that the purpose of law was not punishment but repair, and that repair required clarity made public. He then turned to Elena and asked her to confirm, in her own words, that the record reflected her experience accurately. Elena spoke calmly, confirming dates and actions without embellishment, her account concise and complete. Rowan thanked her and declared the record closed. The doors opened, and the announcement was read in the courtyard, not as spectacle but as notice, the words carrying across stone and sunlight to those who needed to hear them. Elena stood quietly as the meaning settled. She felt the attention shift, not toward her body or her rank, but toward her name attached to a fact that could not be erased. Afterward, Rowan invited Elena to the antechamber and presented a sealed letter granting her protection under royal authority until her chosen placement commenced, a safeguard that recognized her autonomy rather than substituting for it. He asked if she had decided. Elena replied that she wished to accept the provisional role within the Royal Records Office, contingent on a period of review. Rowan agreed, setting terms that emphasized training, independence, and the right to decline. He then added a final measure, appointing Elena as an observer for covenant compliance during future interpact settlements for a limited term, noting that lived detention often detected what procedures missed. Elena accepted with gratitude measured by responsibility rather than relief. As the afternoon wore on, the compound returned to its routines, but the tone had changed. Conversations carried fewer assumptions. Requests arrived with context attached. Elena completed her remaining tasks, transferring notes to the central archive, ensuring that the correction would endure beyond memory. When she stepped into the courtyard again, the sky was clear, the distance from gate to hall familiar and steady. Rowan crossed the space with an aide and paused to acknowledge her, not with ceremony, but with a nod that conveyed trust. He remarked that justice rarely felt dramatic when it worked, and Elena agreed, adding that drama often signaled something had already gone wrong. Rowan smiled and wished her a steady evening. As dusk approached, Elena returned to pack her belongings. The ledger went into her bag beside the folded scarf, now less a talisman than a habit she chose to keep. A notice arrived confirming her start date and outlining her first assignment, a review of consent protocols scheduled 3 weeks out. Elena read it twice, noting the timeline, and placed it carefully atop the ledger. When she stepped outside, lanterns were being lit, their glow even and calm. Elena breathed in the air and felt the quiet satisfaction of alignment, knowing that what had shifted was not merely her placement, but the recognition that law, when learned fully and applied without haste, could change outcomes without raising a voice. She walked the courtyard one last time as a resident of Ravenfell under correction rather than custody, and then turned toward the path ahead, her pace measured, her footing sure. The morning Elena Harper departed the compound, the path beyond the gate lay clear and measured, the kind of clarity that arrived after decisions were recorded and acknowledged. She carried her bag lightly, ledger secured, scarf folded by choice rather than habit, and paused once to look back at the courtyard where lanterns had burned evenly the night before. King Rowan Blackthorn met her at the threshold not as a sovereign receiving petition, but as a steward seeing a duty concluded. He confirmed her travel arrangements, the start date at the Royal Records Office, and the observer appointment that would place her presence where future settlements required careful attention. Elena thanked him and asked a final question, whether recognition endured when attention moved elsewhere. Rowan replied that recognition endured when it was written well and witnessed honestly, and that he intended to ensure both. They parted with mutual respect rather than ceremony. The journey to the capital unfolded without interruption. Measured in miles, Elena counted instinctively, the road steady beneath her steps. When the city came into view, its towers clean against the sky, Elena felt no rush, only readiness. Her first days in the records office were quiet by design, orientation without spectacle, training that emphasized accuracy and impartiality. She learned the cadence of review and the discipline of margin notes, the value of placing context beside text so meaning could not drift. When her first assignment arrived, a review scheduled weeks ahead, she prepared without anxiety, assembling references and timelines with the same care she had used from the beginning. News traveled back to Stoneclaw and Ravenfell in official notices rather than whispers, corrective measures implemented with oversight that outlasted memory. Elena did not seek acknowledgment there. She trusted the record. In the evenings, she walked the capital's perimeter paths, measuring distances she did not need to count anymore, letting the city's order settle into familiarity. One evening, a sealed letter arrived bearing Rowan's mark. Not an order, but an update, confirming that the restitution process had concluded and that compliance protocols were being adopted across neighboring packs. Elena read it once and placed it beside her ledger, a confirmation rather than a surprise. As weeks passed, Elena's presence became expected where clarity was needed, her name associated with completeness rather than controversy. She noticed how rooms adjusted, how assumptions softened when facts were arranged plainly. On a late afternoon, during a review session, a junior clerk asked how Elena learned to hold a room without raising her voice. Elena answered that she listened all the way through and let the paper speak, because paper remembered when people forgot. The clerk nodded, writing it down. When the first observer assignment concluded, Rowan invited Elena to a brief meeting. He thanked her for her diligence and asked whether she wished to continue. Elena replied that she did, provided the work remained honest. Rowan agreed and added, with careful emphasis, that honesty required protection and that she would have it. As Elena left the chamber, she felt the ground beneath her feet steady and known. She understood that her fate had not shifted by chance, nor by rescue, but by the moment authority learned the truth and chose to act on it. In the quiet that followed, Elena folded her scarf once more, placed it beside the ledger, and stepped forward into a role she had earned, aware that recognition, when given fully, did not bind her. It set her free.